Daniel Harper believed control was love. Ananya Rao believed silence was survival. And Rajiv Mehta never imagined a simple drive through suburban Australia would connect him to a crime that would end two lives before the truth could escape. From the outside, the life looked calm, stable, and almost ideal. The Australian man and his pregnant wife lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever seemed out of place. Their home sat on a neat street lined with trimmed lawns and familiar faces. Neighbors saw them as a normal couple building a future together. The man was known for his steady work and structured lifestyle, while his wife was often described as gentle and reserved. When news of her pregnancy became known, it was seen as the final piece of a perfect picture. Inside the house, daily life followed a strict routine. Mornings began early, evenings ended quietly, and weekends were carefully planned. There was little room for spontaneity, but order ruled everything. To outsiders, this discipline looked like responsibility. No one noticed how controlling the atmosphere truly was. Decisions were rarely shared, and emotions were rarely expressed. Silence filled the spaces where communication should have existed. The pregnancy, instead of bringing warmth, added pressure. The woman felt watched rather than supported. Her physical changes and emotional needs went largely unnoticed. She learned to keep her worries to herself, believing it was easier to stay quiet than to disturb the fragile balance of the household. The man, on the other hand, focused on appearances. He spoke proudly about becoming a father, more concerned with how his life looked than how it felt. Small signs of tension appeared, but were easily ignored. Missed appointments, restless nights, and unspoken frustration blended into the background of everyday life. Friends and family saw smiles and polite conversations, never suspecting how disconnected the couple had become. What seemed like a peaceful beginning was actually the slow build-up to something far darker, hidden beneath routine, control, and carefully maintained silence. As the pregnancy progressed, the woman found herself spending more time away from home. Regular medical checkups, prenatal classes, and simple errands became reasons to leave the house and breathe freely, even if only for a short while. She began relying on ride services because driving had become uncomfortable. These journeys, though ordinary, slowly became the only moments where she felt calm. One driver started appearing more often than the others. He was an Indian migrant who worked long hours, taking every possible ride to support his family. His presence was quiet and consistent. He did not ask personal questions or offer advice. The car rides were mostly filled with silence, which felt comforting rather than awkward. Over time, familiarity grew without intention. The woman noticed how different she felt during these rides. There was no pressure to explain herself or pretend everything was fine. The driver's calm demeanor created a sense of safety she had not felt in a long time. The city passed by the windows as she sat back, feeling briefly detached from the life waiting for her at home. As weeks went on, the rides became longer and more frequent. The shared routine built an unspoken bond. Simple gestures, such as waiting patiently or adjusting the seat for her comfort, carried more weight than expected. The connection was subtle, rooted in emotional relief rather than desire. It grew quietly, without clear boundaries. She did not plan for anything to change, but emotions rarely follow plans. The woman began scheduling rides intentionally, choosing times when she knew he would be working. These moments felt like an escape, even though they existed within everyday normalcy. What seemed harmless slowly crossed into dangerous territory. Neither of them fully acknowledged it, but something irreversible had begun, growing in the quiet spaces between destinations, unnoticed by the world outside the moving car. As the pregnancy advanced, uncertainty slowly replaced excitement. Routine medical visits began to feel heavy, filled with information the woman struggled to process. Dates, measurements, and reports created quiet confusion. At first, she dismissed her concerns, convincing herself that stress was shaping her thoughts. But the doubts refused to disappear. During one appointment, subtle details stood out in a way they had not before. The timeline no longer felt clear. The realization came gradually, settling into her mind with unsettling clarity. She understood the truth long before she admitted it to herself. The child she was carrying did not belong to her husband. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her, leaving her isolated and fearful. From that moment on, every movement felt risky. She became cautious with her words, her phone, and her schedule. The house felt smaller and the silence heavier. She avoided eye contact and limited her time at home whenever possible. Sleep became difficult, filled with restless thoughts about consequences she could not control. She considered many options but found no safe path forward. Confession felt impossible, and running away seemed unrealistic. The future she had imagined collapsed under the truth she carried alone. Each passing day made the secret more dangerous, not just for her, but for the unborn child as well. Guilt and fear competed constantly. She worried about how the truth would affect everyone involved, especially herself. The pregnancy became a reminder of a choice she never meant to make. Medical visits, once routine, now felt like countdowns to exposure. As her body changed, so did her behavior. She withdrew from friends and family, creating distance to protect her secret. What she did not realize was that the truth was already leaving traces behind. Paperwork, records, and biological facts do not disappear. While she struggled in silence, the secret grew stronger, slowly pushing everything toward. The truth reached the husband in fragments, not all at once. At first, there were small inconsistencies that unsettled him. Dates did not align, documents raised quiet questions, and medical details hinted at something deeply wrong. What began as suspicion quickly turned into obsession. He searched for certainty, driven by a need to regain control over what he believed was his life. As he dug deeper, the reality became impossible to deny. Biological evidence and timelines confirmed what his instincts had already sensed. The child was not his. The discovery did not bring sadness or reflection. Instead, it ignited intense anger. His sense of identity and authority collapsed in a single moment. He felt humiliated, convinced that everyone around him would see him as weak and foolish. The pregnancy, once a source of pride, transformed into a symbol of betrayal. His thoughts shifted from understanding to punishment. In his mind, the situation demanded correction, not compassion. Rather than seeking help or confronting the truth calmly, he withdrew inward. His behavior changed in subtle but dangerous ways. He became quieter, more calculating, watching every detail. The home felt tense, charged with something unspoken. His focus was no longer on the future, but on protecting his image at any cost. Jealousy mixed with resentment, forming a toxic mindset. He blamed his wife for destroying the life he believed he controlled. The unborn child became a reminder of what he thought had been taken from him. Reason faded as anger took its place. In his distorted thinking, he began to see himself as the victim of a deep injustice. The idea of loss became unbearable. Instead of accepting the truth, he convinced himself that removing the problem would restore order. This belief grew stronger with each passing day, quietly shaping a decision that would soon turn irreversible. The night it happened appeared ordinary from the outside. The neighborhood was quiet, and nothing suggested that violence was about to unfold inside the house. The man had spent days mentally preparing himself, replaying the same thoughts until they felt justified. By the time night arrived, his decision felt final. He believed he was restoring control, not destroying lives. Inside the home, the atmosphere was tense but silent. The woman sensed danger but could not fully understand it. Her body was heavy with pregnancy, limiting her movement and slowing her reactions. The man's actions were deliberate, driven by rage that had been building for weeks. There was no sudden explosion of emotion, only cold determination shaped by resentment and pride. What followed happened quickly. The woman was overpowered before she could escape or call for help. The unborn child was lost in the same moment, erased along with her future. The house absorbed the violence without sound, its walls hiding what no one outside could see. Afterward, the man focused on covering his actions. He attempted to reshape the scene into something believable, something accidental. He adjusted details, removed traces, and convinced himself that careful planning would protect him. In his mind, logic replaced morality. But panic soon followed control. His hands shook as he overlooked small details that could not be erased. Injuries did not match the story he intended to tell. Objects were out of place. Time itself worked against him, creating gaps that no explanation could fully close. As the night ended, the house felt empty and unnatural. The silence was no longer calm, but heavy with consequence. The man believed the worst was over, unaware that his actions had already set irreversible events in motion. What he saw as an ending was only the beginning of exposure, investigation, and eventual downfall. Authorities arrived expecting a routine case, but the scene immediately raised concerns. The condition of the house and the woman's injuries did not support the explanation given. What was described as a tragic accident lacked the natural signs of one. Small details stood out to trained eyes, creating doubt from the very beginning. Investigators carefully documented everything. The timeline felt incomplete, with gaps that could not be explained by stress or confusion. Medical findings showed force rather than misfortune. Each piece of evidence pointed in the same direction, slowly dismantling the version of events that had been presented. As forensic analysis progressed, the case grew more complex. Medical records were reviewed, and pregnancy details were examined closely. Biological testing revealed information that changed the entire investigation. The unborn child was not related to the husband. This discovery added a clear motive to the case, transforming suspicion into focus. Digital footprints were uncovered next. Travel records, ride histories, and location data revealed patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. These findings led investigators to the Indian driver. He was questioned extensively, his background examined in detail. The evidence showed emotional involvement, but no connection to the act of violence itself. Once cleared of involvement in the crime, his role remained limited to biological fact. The attention shifted fully back to the husband. With motive established and physical evidence mounting, his story collapsed under scrutiny. Pressure increased as contradictions multiplied. Forensic results, expert opinions, and documented behavior all aligned. What initially appeared as a domestic tragedy was now clearly understood as a deliberate act. The investigation moved quickly toward prosecution. Every attempt to hide the truth only strengthened the case against him. What he believed was a carefully controlled situation unraveled completely. As details of the investigation became public, the case drew intense attention across the country. News outlets focused on the shocking combination of betrayal, control, and violence. The image of a quiet suburban life collapsed, replaced by a story that unsettled many. Public reaction shifted rapidly as more facts were released, and sympathy moved away from the husband. The woman's life was re-examined through a new lens. Reports highlighted her isolation, the pressure she lived under, and the emotional distance within a marriage. She was no longer seen as someone who caused chaos, but as someone trapped in a situation that offered no safe exit. The unborn child became a symbol of a future that was violently taken away. The revelation involving the Indian driver sparked widespread discussion. Many questioned how a simple connection could evolve into something so devastating. Authorities clarified that his involvement did not extend beyond biology. Still, his name remained tied to the case, exposing the painful consequences of unintended relationships. Public opinion gradually separated his role from the crime itself. Media coverage intensified, turning the case into a national conversation about control, masculinity, and obsession. Experts spoke about warning signs that often go unnoticed in relationships that appear stable on the surface. The story was no longer just about one crime, but about patterns that can exist behind closed doors. The husband's behavior came under harsh scrutiny. Past actions that once seemed insignificant were now viewed as indicators of deeper issues. Every detail added weight to the narrative of premeditation and emotional instability. As the trial approached, the public waited for accountability. The case had become more than a headline. It was a reflection of how quickly unchecked anger can destroy lives, leaving behind grief, unanswered questions, and a lasting sense of unease. The final chapter of the case did not end with a prison sentence. Long after the courtroom emptied, the impact of the crime continued to spread quietly through many lives. The house where everything happened stood vacant for months, avoided by neighbors who could not forget what occurred inside. It became a symbol of how violence can exist behind ordinary walls, unseen until it is too late. The case was studied by professionals across Australia. Investigators used it as an example of how control, secrecy, and emotional isolation can escalate into deadly outcomes. Small warning signs, once overlooked, were re-examined with new importance. The story reshaped how similar cases were approached, especially those involving pregnancy and domestic pressure. The woman's memory remained central to public discussions. She was remembered not for her mistakes, but for the circumstances that trapped her. Advocacy groups highlighted her story to raise awareness about silent suffering in seemingly stable relationships. Her life became a reminder that vulnerability often hides behind routine and politeness. The unborn child remained the most painful part of the tragedy. That loss carried a weight no sentence could balance. It represented a future erased by anger and obsession. The case forced many to confront how quickly life can be destroyed when power is valued more than humanity. The man, now confined to a prison cell, lost everything he tried to protect. His reputation, freedom, and identity were gone. Control, which once defined him, no longer existed. What remained was consequence. Over time, the headlines faded, but the lessons stayed. The story served as a warning that truth cannot be buried, and violence always leaves evidence behind. In the end, the crime changed many lives forever, proving that silence, when ignored for too long, can turn deadly.